Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Glad everybody could stay with us. And I think it's been a great show. And we're into our third day and wrapping things up. So my name, if you don't know who I am, my name is Nick Donino. I am a 20-year plus veteran in the tent industry, just recently retired from putting up tents, but nevertheless have extensive experience in putting up tents in tight spaces in New York City. And I am also the founder of Block and Roll Tent Ballasting Solutions. So we're going to talk today about some custom tent solutions. And what I thought I would do is, I thought I would keep it, turn my phone off there, sorry. I thought I would keep it somewhat simple and somewhat, there's a lot of new people, newer tent companies or younger generation tent companies out there and younger installers. And so I wanted to keep it to attainable solutions that I think most people can do. And the main focus is going to be based on what you can do with your inventory. And so we're going to talk about different things. Now, if you want to see a bigger screen, just press those 4 arrows up over the my red arrow, and it'll make the presentation larger on your screen. So we're going to talk about some DIY customization options. We're going to talk about, utilizing your existing inventory and what extra parts can I add that I could make custom products. And we're going to talk about a full custom build, which that takes the challenge out of it because you have somebody else do everything for you. But we want to hit a bunch of these different topics. So one of the first topics we're going to talk about, and for me, when I first started doing tenting, I think that when I saw something like this, it opened up so much possibility for me. And what it did was it showed that, hey, I could put a tent in almost any place, even if there's an obstruction there. And this was a big thing for me to figure out and help me expand our venues and different size tents that we can put in different places. Now, going back to that other picture, it's basically a modification of the fabric, and you can just have a pocket put in, and then there's an additional lace line that would go down, and something you can do yourself if you sew or weld in house. Otherwise, you can have your tent manufacturer do that for you and just add it to an existing top or make a new top that has that modification in it. And they can, of course, be reused. While it looks very, very complicated, it's rather a simple modification because it takes place between a bay of the arches. And they did a little surround around it and some custom vinyl and a little custom facade. This photo is courtesy of Stamford Tent in Connecticut. Working around, different poles and different other obstructions similar to a tree can be accomplished. And if you look at this picture, not only did they make the slot for the pole to go through, they also used some custom width bays to work around their doors. So you can see where they used a short bay on either side and kind of then standard bays in between, and we're able to frame around. And that's a good trick. For a lot of different tents is having some different size bays, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I just wanted to give another inside shot, another great shot by Stamford, where you could see the pole is inside and the tree is inside, but when you really look at it, it doesn't really stick out. It looks like it's supposed to be there. So in other words, a great way to maximize that space. Here's what I call the oops factor. This is a job that I did years ago. And we had to add some tents for rain, and everybody forgot about the pole. So with a little bit of shifting of the tents, we were able to use the lace line, cut through, and then relace it back up. And then at a later time, we can get this fixed. So this is something that, it's a quick solution, but something that you could repair afterwards. But it did get us through a tough situation at the moment. Other ways to deal with trees, this doesn't even require any customization at all. All we did was use a smaller tent top and in that particular bay, and a smaller width tent top, and it didn't pull all the way and allowed us room for the tree to come through. And one of these projects even got us a front page on Intense magazine. It's very similar, different layout, but the same thing where the top just didn't come down all the way. So now this is a big one because adding parts to existing inventory is something that is relatively inexpensive and could really maximize your inventory that you already have in stock. So we're going to talk first about wedges. So wedges are very, very simple and utilize a lot of your own parts. And basically, a wedge consists of usually a same size rafter that you're already using, just some custom purlins and a new top. And you can create various turns and various degrees. And you can probably stock a couple standard size degrees that you can put together to get different, make different angles. And you can see in the bottom lower corner, it does make, I think I have a pointer here. I can, oh, sorry, let me go back. You can create different angles to get in. And also, if you look down here, there's utilization of different size mids to make that tent custom to fit within the sidewalk perimeter. It's a couple of inside shots where you could see what the wedges look like from the inside, and they really do create a flowing space, and you don't feel like you're moving from one tent to another or changing. The lower picture in the bottom middle, same thing, is just a couple of wedges in between a standard clear span. And thank you, Stamford Tent, for some of these pictures. Another big way to do it with structures, an easy way to do it with structures, is a transition panel. And basically, this will allow you to take one size structure, typically gable end, and have you go up or down to a larger structure seamlessly. And you can look at the picture on the right, you can see how it's seamed. There's no gutter needed because it's tied right in. And from the inside, it really does create a big open space into two different size structures. Here's an inside shot. So you can see on the right, you can see where the transition is, and it's got a solid panel here. But when you look down the main view, it looks like one big open tent. You don't really notice that this was two different tents, two different sizes. And it's a simple thing that you can do with a couple of parts. And we talked a little bit before about custom sized bays. And this is, simple as it gets. And most people stock their tents in one size bay because it's easy, 5 meter or 3 meter. But having that 2 meter or 1.5 meter or whatever the division is, you have something odd, you can always add it in and create that custom length tent. In this case, if I click again here, you'll see the two custom bays that are the two shorter bays allowed centering over the staircase right there in the middle. And that really allows you to utilize your inventory, for the venue and for the specific needs of the venue. And again, here's an inside shot of a custom bay, which you can't really even tell the difference, that there's a shorter bay in between when it's all the decor is set up. By all means, if there's any questions, I have my note screen up, and I'm going to pull down and see if there's any questions. In the meantime, we can talk about in the chat section, and I'll address them later. Interior gables. These are terrific. If you have a gable tent, you can place most often without any other parts. You can place a gable on the interior of the structure, creating partitions. But use the creativity to your advantage. And in this particular event, Stamford created a viewing area for the chef area, and just gives you an idea of things you can do with the interior gable rather than just a covered porch that most everybody does. Here's another version of an interior gable. What they did here was they only brought it in one section and not across the whole tent. And that allowed a little outdoor patio in a corner nook without taking up the whole space. Now, this will require some custom fabric, but again, the options are there to really create a unique space for your clients utilizing your same inventory. Okay, now we're going to talk about some, if I'm going too fast, I apologize, some mono-pitch structures. Now, again, these are mostly conversions of existing parts. They're similar rafters, similar legs. Some of them are higher, but you can utilize a lot of your own inventory. The rear of the mono-pitch uses a standard leg. Some of the rafters are standard, and then you just need some custom parts. And you can create different look. Thank you, Star Tent, for that picture on the bottom. And you can see what it looks like. It gives you a completely unique look and offering to the client for different heights where you can achieve inside, whether it's overlooking a view and you need bigger height, or if they want to have some kind of focal point, a high chandelier or something in a tight space, you can get the height of a tent that's double the size in half the space. So there's a good option for utilizing some of your existing inventory. And in the theme of monopitch, they did something really creative here to really maximize the space of this courtyard. They utilized not only a smaller bay, but split that to two smaller bays and made one of them a monopitch, which really gives them a great use of the space and using almost every inch of what was required, and not a big, huge expense in doing something custom like that. And this may seem so simple, but maybe some people overlook this, but multi-height legs, if you don't have them in your inventory, you want to stock some because they come in handy. You can do going down staircases, you can do over different patios. Simple photo from McCarthy here showing you over somebody's backyard patio where they came down with a longer leg. And in the picture on the bottom and the right, you'll see part of the property started to drop off, so there was a deck put in, but they did use some different height legs to get to that point. So that gives you a lot of flexibility in maneuvering tents in different spaces. Sometimes you can build up the leg on a structure, you can build a platform for the leg, but on simple frame tents and some simple structures, you may want to just think about stocking some multi-height legs. Now we got custom ends. And, again, I already own most of the tent, let's say. Stanford owns all this structure. And what they did was they added some custom ends to create these trapezoids and work themselves around the property to follow the lines of the venue. Again, easy way. And to the client, it looks like a completely custom tent. And really, there's only some minimal parts in here that make it custom. And custom ends can also be stock parts from the manufacturer, but custom to the venue, meaning that it'll convert your tent to fit a custom space. Simply by putting in hex ends or octagonal ends, or there's a variety of ends available that you can add to a structure, and you can fit in different spaces that you normally couldn't fit. Now, when the budget allows, you may want to go a little bit more custom with an end, but basically, again, you have a standard structure up these arches here, and then just this end is where it gets custom and it wraps around the client's house. And this is probably great for somebody that's got a good budget, or somebody that does this every year, and you could absorb the cost over multi-year rentals in having something like this customized. But again, you're only doing one bay. You're not customizing the whole entire tent. Custom tops, obviously colored tops, or you can always change the colors and do different things. I'll give you a little a history on this job. This was Super Bowl a few years back in Minneapolis, and the venue and the building department, where the venue was, the building department would not allow on this rooftop any flammable materials. They would not even accept flame retardant vinyl. Nothing could be combustible on the top. So we had to scramble and figure out a way to put this tent up on top here for the NFL and not use any combustible materials. So basically we took a standard tent, and this happens to be a structure from our sponsor, Fiesta Tents, and we added metal roofing to it. We used their glass wall system, and I don't have full pictures, but we're in the back of this on the right picture. Normally, the panels, the solid panels, are made of PVC, which are combustible. We had to swap them out and use solid aluminum panels. And so these are, but we use the standard framing and just were able to put in new panels to replace the combustible materials. Very unique situation. I don't know anybody else that's come up with this situation before, but the idea is that we were able to take this and do it basically with mostly stock parts, made the job attainable, and kept us within the budget that was needed for this project. Now, tent liners and fabric. Been around a long time. There's nothing really custom about those, but they really do change the look of a tent. And if you don't do them yourselves, you can always hook up with a subcontract company that does fabrics. And I think these, in this particular tents that I'm showing, they're not even structured, built liners. They are just custom fabrics that were hung in a tent. But just to give you a quick look of different looks and how you can immediately change the look of a tent. Often in these times, the clients are looking for something that doesn't look like a tent. And this is one way to achieve that. Again, all standard parts, just some custom fabric work. So I see I'm going to go back up a second to Gene. You got a question about how you attach the metal panel. So what we did was, and I'll flash back to that real quick. So what we did is, and it's hard to see in the picture, rather than screwing, we didn't want to screw down to the top of any of the rafters because we didn't want to create a leak issue for future use. So what we did was on left and right of the rafters, we attached some aluminum angle iron. And that allowed us to screw from the top into the angle iron down, and we could put as many holes as we wanted, many screws as we wanted. And we had minimal screws going into the sides of the rafters. But at that point in the side of the rafter, there's no leak issue because it's not exposed to the outside. It's under the keter, under the top. And that's how we attached it to the frame. We used as much angle iron as we could and not to put as many screws into the actual tent frame. I want to talk a little bit about custom ballasting because sometimes you just can't get a tent into a space because you don't have the room for the ballasting. Now, in this particular build, I'm going to show some other ones. The one that this picture is showing, they just didn't want to have the blocks around it as an aesthetic thing. But, and I'm showing you how we did it. So what we did was we put heavy steel road plates on the ground. We had them spec'd out to the size for the tent with the engineer. And we built a stick floor around the plates, and then the next layer of stick floor went over the plates. And if you look at the base plates of a tent, that's why they are raised up so that the flooring came underneath that and the base plates were up, because when we put the glass in, we needed to be flush with the finished floor, which is here, and you don't see anything under the floor. So when the tent was done, it was freestanding. And this is not different than they do make some cassette flooring that you can buy. I know Losberger makes a cassette floor that you can get pre-weighted, and you can weight your floor sections. This is kind of a way around it, and it worked fairly well for a couple of situations that I've had in the past. So here's a smaller tent that we built some steel plates underneath the floor and then build the floor over it. And that's what the steel plate looks like. We used, in this case, some strata flooring, so the plates are against the building here. They didn't want to have the weights inside the structure, and the floor wasn't heavy enough just to bolt to it. But the combination of the flooring and the steel plates under it gave us enough holding power to meet engineering. Now, when you do things like this, you will need some good material handling. In this case, we used a magnetic a magnetic device that you can pick up steel plates with, and that worked fairly well. For those larger plates, we used a double magnetic setup, 2 magnets on sort of a truss that can span and pick up the plate evenly. You don't want to pick them up by hand, and you don't want to get your hands stuck under them, and it made it a lot easier to do that. Here's another use of the steel plates. In this application, we had joining tents, and we couldn't have the blocks anywhere inside the tent or in the way. These are double plates that are welded together to get the weight that we needed. And because of placement, and we had to do some drilling on site, as you can see the metal shards, but that allowed us to kind of move things around and not have be stuck with an exact location on the plate. Typically, you'd like to have that pre-done, but in this particular case, we had to make some moves and drill them on site. See if there's any questions before I go any further. Okay. Now, this is perhaps maybe the easiest way to do custom tenting. Now, custom branding, and there's 2 ways to do this. The first way is to have your tent manufacturer print a logo or a custom print right directly on the tent vinyl. The second way to do it, which is to use application vinyl, which every picture, the Nespresso picture, the Tribeca picture, the Belmont picture are all peel and stick vinyl that are applied on the tent vinyl. And what this does is it allows you to customize at a reasonable price and remove when you're done and you're back to normal stock. The city logo, that is a full printed gable done by the manufacturer. In this case, that was our sponsor, Fiesta. And but simple things you can do, and now you have a custom tent. And here's just a shot of putting some applications on and showing you that, you know, it can be done very easily. You can, and if you don't print vinyl, you can order vinyl from somebody who does printing, and you can apply it yourself. It's not very difficult to do. And, you know, 1 or 2 people can get it done in a very short time. And while we're in the theme of printed goods, this I pulled off of Tommy Wilson from All Occasion Rental, and he did this phenomenal job of a printed mural in the middle of his tent liner. I thought this was one of the greatest things I've ever seen on the inside of a tent. Did a great job with this. And it's a great way to really make a custom and a big impact custom look inside a tent. I'm going to talk real quick about custom elements. Megan, let me know if we're good on time. So custom elements could be anything that you can do, and a lot of this stuff can be DIY that you can do inside the tent. So I'll jump back. This is a tent, and I have another picture. Just some wood panels that were put up. We just basically had a vinyl wall. Inside the vinyl wall, we put some metal studding, and then just added this wood paneling, and gives a real permanent look. Here's another shot of some custom things you can do with multi-level floors, you know, and these create great looks. And sometimes you don't really need it, but it just gives a different look to have a sunken dance floor. And another good thing about raised floors is if you take a look here on the red arrows, those are air conditioning vents. So sometimes what you can do with a raised floor is you can create a plenum, and you can pump your AC or heat under the floor, seal the outside perimeter of the floor, and the entire floor becomes the air conditioning duct. And this allows you to have hidden ducts around the tent, whether it's in the floor or, as you see in the multi-level one, coming in the side. Excuse me. It also allows you to have a constant airflow that's not blowing linens and curtains and blowing on people directly. Great way to utilize raised flooring, and of course multi-levels. As you see in the bottom right, you can really do some creative things with it. Here's that shot again of the inside, and here's another shot. So I wanted to show you here also, by doing these kind of panels, we're also able to put permanent looking air conditioning in, so returns and supplies, and it gives a much better look, and looks like you're inside a building. And this was a very inexpensive way to make this look like this. Just check your venue and your inspectors to make sure if they require flame retardant materials, you use that, because they could get you in trouble if you don't, and they come and inspect you. I'm sorry, I missed a couple of questions here. If you don't have a floor, can you just use the steel? Do you drill the steel to the surface? We do drill the steel to mount the plate on. We usually drill and tap it. You could just use the steel, because what's good about the steel, it's very low profile. It will create a little bit of a trip hazard, but a lot less than a concrete block, because sometimes you can use steel. It's as small as 3/4 of an inch off the ground, depending on how much weight you need. And the metal plates are attached. Yeah, the base plates are attached to the metal plates just by drilling holes and tapping, and then we just put bolts right into it. And I can come back and answer some more questions on that. As far as full custom build, so I'm not going to really talk about too much of this, but Stanford Tent sent me this shot. It's a private event they did. It is the most spectacular thing I've seen, one of the most spectacular things I've seen in a custom tenting. Just to know the possibilities, this is where you build your relationships with your tent manufacturer, because they all have the capabilities to do something like this. and really wow your client with something that's just phenomenal. Obviously, you need the big budgets for that, but they're out there. You got to just find them. Okay, I'm going to turn things over at this point. We'll see if we have questions at the end, if we have some time left. But I'm going to turn things over and invite Tommy Wilson up onto the stage. And he's going to talk a little bit about a custom job that he did with the items that we've been talking about, utilizing your inventory. And he's going to do a case study on a project he did.
Thanks, Nick. Great presentation, man. I've got just an application where we did an end user sale. And it was a little bit of a unique situation where we had to put it. So there is the Newport Levee is just south of Cincinnati in northern Kentucky. It's an entertainment complex. They have movie theater, aquarium, restaurants, bars, shopping, just across from downtown Cincinnati. So they've got this kind of outdoor park area where they have these containers that are different restaurants, bars. There's a couple of boutiques down there. And they wanted to be able to enclose this space and without losing any of their views and be able to have like a comfortable space for people to come to outside, particularly this year with COVID. Because they were not able to get the indoor traffic like they'd had in the past. So they were trying to keep their tenants, businesses working. So they reached out to us in mid-August to kind of start a conversation. So there's all these obstacles under there that are kind of fixed. And with the timeline that we had to kind of work with a stock frame. So this is kind of the end result of the project here. I'll go through the rest of the slides here. Nick, if you could advance me forward. Okay, that's good there. Thank you. So this is actually on top of a parking garage. So one of the obstacles was that we had kind of a limited area that we could drill through because of the roof membrane for the parking garage. So we were allowed to use concrete anchors, which is great. Because of the slab thickness, we couldn't use our standard size. So we started looking at, getting a shallower, a shouldered anchor where we wouldn't have a problem. Where once we drilled and we set the anchor, that the anchor didn't drop down too far, or if we didn't, if we drilled too deep, we wouldn't drill into the roof membrane. We also used special drill bits that kind of had a stop on them to keep us from drilling too deep. So one of the other obstacles here is the site access. We just did not have any way to get equipment up here, and it was about, I don't know, say like a 400 foot ramp or so. And they wanted to have this thing open by Thanksgiving. So we heard back from them around September. They wanted to move forward. So we went back to the site to confirm the size and emplacement. So we landed on a 15 meter by 35 meter Loosberger P5. And so one of the things that we had to really look at closely was the amount of clearance we had. Some of the containers we were going to be right on top of one of them. And then on another one, we were going to be a couple inches away. Give me one more slide, Nick. Here we go. So this shows the clearance we had in one area. So we had to be really careful about how we laid this thing out and just making sure that it fit. So it's important to have, again, we have great vendors in this industry. But this is the Loosberger P5. And so I got on the phone with Joe Eimer and kind of figured out, okay, if we're, 2 foot from the edge of this container, exactly how tall is this thing? Can we make this thing work on the standard 3.4 leg, which was, what we could get with the timeline that we had. So, we measured and measured and measured, and then we measured again. And it looked like the thing was going to work. And I took a few of my crew leaders with me on this just to kind of help me walk through and think through this, because we were going to have to raise this whole thing by hand. So we knew we were going to have to kind of figure out a way, to invert some rafters, and build. We might have built one or two of them in the air, and how could we do that just with manpower? So we went through and got the anchors installed mid-November, and the layout was pretty critical. Nick, can you advance one more slide? So, in addition to the other obstacles, we had to marry into these structures off the side and just make connections. With COVID, parts of this tent were going to have to remain open no matter what. So fortunately, this was pretty easy to implement. All we really had to do was put the walls over the canopies. Next slide, please. So in addition to the main structure, we had to do a marquee going into the shopping center. And those doors have to remain open pretty much all the time. So we had to figure out pretty precisely how this thing was going to fit in here, because we didn't have a lot of room to play with, and we weren't really going to be able to move this stuff around. So this is actually a little Fred's marquee that we got. And we had them make it in 10 by 26 dimension. Again, we were able to anchor just down to the slab. We just had to use the shorter anchors to anchor this down. Next slide, please. And this just shows the finished clearance on the doors. We only had a couple inches to work with there. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we were fortunate in that everything we ordered came in exactly as we ordered it, and all of our measurements worked out pretty well. There was a couple little field adjustments I think we made on this leg. These two legs I think were just a couple inches short than what I thought they were, partially because I didn't realize how deep the cantilever guides came in on this tent. But we were able to field modify that and it worked out just fine. Next slide. Okay, we want to thank Fiesta for sponsoring this session. And if there's any questions for Nick or myself, feel free to throw something in the chat and we'll get you up here.
Great, Tommy, thank you. And thank you again, Fiesta, for sponsoring our session. Any other questions? I know we had a few questions on the metal plates. If we didn't answer it, just find me in a I think the main thing to take away from this is, again, I wanted a little focus on newer companies because they haven't done it. And I remember being a new company when I first started. I remember the best situation for me was actually going to these shows and meeting people. Actually, somebody like Steve, who just popped in, who was my anchor rep and who I could speak to and talk about how to do these different things. And that's how you learn how to do all these little things. And then, to me, it opens up your eyes to the site inspection. And now you look at a space and say, yeah, I can put a tent there. Sure, we can do that. And you can do it either with flooring or with custom bays or with different size tops or whatever you have to do. It opens up your selling capabilities.
I agree. I think, participating in some of the networking groups, this group, Matra, and just coming out and seeing photos of what other guys do. And, particularly earlier in my career, it's really nice to kind of, ask these guys how they executed some of this stuff. And it really kind of opened my eyes what you could do just with kind of pretty standard stuff and just a couple of modifications. It's pretty impressive.
Tommy, I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
By the way, great job, you and Nick, doing this seminar. This was some great stuff to see, and up close, it was great. The job that you just showed us, what time frame, how much time did you have to complete that? You mentioned that you had to do everything by hand because of where you were. What was the manpower requirements? How many guys, how many hours to get that done?
We did. So the cool thing was they let us do the anchors ahead of time. That was huge because that takes some time. So having that done ahead of time, we got the frame up and got it skinned with a crew of 8. in one day, and that included, pushing all this stuff up and down that big ramp with a 10-ox and some carts. It actually went really smooth, and it didn't take that many people.
So you were able to get a 10-ox in there easily, or was it tough to get it in there?
So you could get it to the ramp. We couldn't get it to the level where we were working. Basically, you see those short steps that Nick's got pulled up here. Like, we couldn't quite get up to there, but we could get to this level here via, where the igloos are. We could get to that with the 10-ox relatively easy, but we were just width limited. So we had to put the beams on carts and push them long ways, push the carts up the ramp, because the ramp's only like 7.5 feet wide, so you can't even get, like, our Moffett wouldn't even fit on that ramp.
I like to say, we're listening to Tommy and his, tight spaces. One of the photos, let's see if I can get back to one of the photos. One of the photos I showed, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the woes of working in New York City. So in this project, which is one of the scenes that we showed, jump back. We do a site inspection a few months prior, so this particular job here. And we do a site inspection. Now, this has two main structures, and then at the end of, if you can see where my mouse is on the right picture, at the end, there's a 90-degree structure there, and there's a bunch of other structures on the other side. And this was built in a park in New York City. And you do the measurement, and we send somebody out, and we had to send a surveyor out to do the measurements, because we had to work under every tree branch and leaf. And we're not allowed to remove a leaf off the tree. We were not allowed to touch any part of the tree. And the challenge becomes that 2 months prior to the event, we have to calculate how much we think those trees are going to grow over the next few months and how much more they're going to hang down, and reconfigure, remeasure again, and remake calculations. And so certain things we had to keep as low as possible. So there could be so many challenges, and that's why it helped what we did with this transition, because we were able to transition to stay with a smaller structure, to go to a lower profile, or stay away from tree branches and really work our way underneath. I wish I had an overhead shot of how many trees we had to go around and not touch one. Pretty interesting working in places like New York City.
And then we have a question from Andrew. So on these custom jobs, do you start with the budget first from the customer, or do you start with the design?
Well, I'll start and see if Tommy has a different opinion. I mean, I think that typically on the custom jobs, you start with the design. But you have to have an idea of the customer budget. I mean, you want to start with the ideas, because but you have to really have an understanding first. Is the customer somebody that values really maximizing the space, or really doing something different? And, so you can come up with an idea first and kind of put it by them and see if they're going to bite as far as, dollar wise, or if their budget is willing to go higher to have this different look. And then from there, you can redesign and make it even better. But I found that a lot of times you offer the design first and you get them to bite on it. And but you have to know the client. If it's somebody you think will never go for a high budget, you just don't even bother offering it.
I think for us, it kind of goes either way, but similar to what Nick's saying, if the client is kind of a known quantity and we kind of have an idea of what they like or what they might have the stomach for, we're generally going to start with the design. If it's somebody that we don't know at all, we might try to get, a ballpark. People are really non-committal when it comes to sharing an actual budget, but, you can kind of read their face if you start throwing some numbers around. But, if and then sometimes it'll surprise you, like this, for example, the photo Nick showed of the ceiling with the artwork, that was actually the client's budget option. Their original proposal was really crazy, but they didn't have the stomach for it. Just like everybody that had a budget, it was just higher. And then the Clear project, that was kind of a cold call. And we came up with the idea of how we could do it, kind of with a standard item that we could work with at the timeline. And they jumped all over it, which was really kind of a pleasant surprise compared to the rest of the year. Everybody else who had called, I want my structure to have a $4,000 budget or whatever it was, that didn't work. So,
Melanie, to answer your question, no. Not only no, it torrential rained the entire install. So there you go. So you asked if there was a charge enough for the headache. I don't know if you could ever get enough for a job like that.
All right, David Murray here says, Nick, on your plates, what was the thickness of the plates?
David, they vary. So on different jobs, we've used a lot of 1-inch plates, and some of the ones that I had in the picture were actually 1.5-inch plates, and was get more weight. And some of those plates were joined together and welded to be 2 plates together. So maybe two 1-inch plates to make a 2-inch plate. So an average, if I'm not mistaken, and don't quote me, a 4x8 by 1-inch steel plate, I believe is about 1,300 pounds. And so sometimes we had to double that to 2,600. But you get some extra holding power, and I know you're an engineer, so you know better, but our engineers gave us some extra holding power by building the floor on top and integrating, connecting the floor over the plate and joining it and screwing it together, gave us some extra holding power on top of the steel plate. But some of those smaller plates that I showed, those little 2x4 plates, those are 1.5-inch thick and come in about 500 pounds. But you can get steel in all different sizes and thicknesses for anybody.
Another thing that you can do sometimes with steel, if it's just for short term, is we've rented road plates and then just kind of welded stuff to them.
Exactly.
So it doesn't even have to be custom fabrication. It can be something that you rent. You don't even have to own it.
Some of those plates were rented, and because you can't really damage them, you can weld and then you can grind off. If you drill holes in it, they don't usually penalize you for that. A few holes threaded in it usually works really well. But they are a great way. I've seen another tent. So I was pretty close. Okay, $12.80 per plate. I was close. So I've seen another company, I believe actually Stanford as well, showed me a picture once of a very creative use of steel plates they use on a balcony in Manhattan. And they, how to get steel plates up in the elevator. So all the steel plates, and don't quote me, might have been 2x4 in size, and they layered them around the whole perimeter and then had an alternating layer on top, and they all bolted together. So the entire ring of the structure was these steel plates that were all joined together, and then they bolted their legs on it, and then the flooring went over, and they had even distribution of weight on the balcony, which is required by a lot of these rooftops, and invisible ballasting, once the flooring was down. They were very creative use. So you can get very creative with steel plates because they're very low profile and they have a lot of density to them. There he is, 25,000 pounds to hold a 40x40 Navi. I assume that's the same job that I just spoke about, and Brian just said that was 25,000 pounds. They got up in an elevator. So kudos to you guys. That was I know there was some great pictures I remember seeing. So there is a lot of creativity, and when we call it custom because you're doing something that's not the norm, and it does. You do have to charge the money, and don't be afraid to charge when you do this type of work, even though it's not as difficult for you. There is cost involved. There's extra labor involved. Labor is one of the biggest things that you'll have on these kind of type of projects. So they do take time to do.
Yeah, and there's kind of the factor of figuring it out. You know what I mean? There's some value in that, and it's hard sometimes to quantify until you've done it once, and then you understand for the future what you actually need to get versus what you thought before you did it.
Exactly. And oftentimes too, check with your manufacturer, because if let's say you have a 20-meter structure on 3-meter leg or 3.4-meter leg, and you need to go higher, you may be able to buy a leg extension and insert a leg extension to the bottom of your leg without buying a whole entire leg. So again, you're getting the customization that you need without the huge expense. And I know we did this with a 50-meter Losberger structure. We needed to go to 5.4-meter leg, and I said, well, we're not going to do 5.4 meters all the time. So we had an engineer to have a leg extension made with steel inserts that could get us to 5.4 and other necessary modifications. But the idea was that now I could pull them out and I've got a standard 4-meter leg. So there are a lot of ways you could work the system to your advantage to have these extra customized parts. Does anybody have any other questions? Megan, how are we on time? Do we have time for a few more questions?
We're doing good. We have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone has any other last minute questions, feel free to send them in and get them answered.
All right, we'll take a look and see if anybody's got a question. Tommy, what do you feel is your most common modification to a tent frame that you're doing?
Our most common modification is probably just a short bay or a different height leg. Probably number one and number two. And even just, when you buy something, just go ahead and buy a half bay.
Yeah.
You'll use it.
I agree.
You absolutely will use it. And it doesn't really cost you anything. Those purlins in that top costing nothing.
I agree with that. So it always comes in handy to have that half bay size.
Yeah, it'll make or break, certain projects. I mean, it can really be. And some people, we haven't gone this far, but I know some folks in the Boston market. I mean, they do everything in like 2.5 meter increments, with walls too. So,
well, I'll tell you, I wish I owned more half-size bays. Working in New York City, we did a lot of jobs that had to get through elevators, and I could tell you many countless hours cutting purlins and rafters and making them shorter to fit in the elevator and putting joiners to bolt them back together. So having some of that shorter stuff really does come in handy. And when you buy, I know when I ordered a lot of my structures, we always order them in sections that we can go. So, if we had a 2.5 meter rafter, we have 5 meter rafters, we had 7.5 meter rafters. We tried to have all the configurations so we can make all the different sizes. And when the time came that you couldn't fit something through a property, well, we could do 2.5 meter pieces to make 5 meters, a 5 meter rafter. We wouldn't, and we would do it that way. We'd have a variety of extensions available, and they always get used. It's just a matter of sometimes you're putting out a 2-piece part sometimes, and sometimes we kept them together. If we had a 10 meter rafter, 7.5 and a 2.5, I'm sorry, a 5 meter rafter, we had a 2.5 and a 2.5 extension. Sometimes we just kept them together, but we knew that when we could separate them and need something shorter or need that extension piece, we would just take it apart and use it. Do you own
creative keystoning is a beautiful thing.
Gene, I see your question. We own the magnets. They're just simple magnet lifters. They're not electric. They have a lever. So when you put them on the plate, you kind of just crank the lever down and it drops the magnet down onto the plate and locks it on. You just want to make sure you use a magnet that's well over the limit of what you're lifting. And 2 is always better than 1 on the larger plates.
All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in. So thank you so much, Nick, and thank you, Tommy. If you have any other questions that didn't get answered, make sure you reach out